Welcome to Rights in Focus, Sex Work, Safety and Online Advertising Platforms. And my name is Yiğit. I'm the Senior Program Officer at the European Sex Workers' Rights Alliance, and I'm also the head of the Digital Rights Program, which we have operating since 2020. And I'm happy to be your facilitator today. A big thank you for all of you for joining us at this really important conversation about sex workers' experiences on online advertising platforms and the impact of these platforms on sex workers' safety, autonomy, and generally fundamental rights. So at ESWA, we believe that digital spaces can and should be shaped by centering the voices and needs of the most marginalized members of our societies. And those who are most impacted by the technology should be recognized as relevant actors with agency and included in the decision-making mechanisms. Okay, lots of people are joining. So since 2020, through ESWA's Digital Rights Program, we have therefore provided capacity building trainings and organized online and in-person meetings for sex workers with ESWA members. We undertook several community research on censorship and discrimination, privacy and data protection, platformization of sex work, and you can find all this previous community research on our website under the Resources tab. And we also worked extensively on EU policies, and we really focused our energy on building new alliances and connections with other social justice movements and organizations, including racial justice, migrants' rights, victims' rights, and LGBT rights movements. Because we believe that there is no such thing as a single issue struggle, and our lives actually are much more connected and intertwined than we often think. And we are all impacted by digital technologies, especially as marginalized communities. Today's event is important because it is pretty much linked to ESWA's work on promoting sex workers' labor and human rights in online spaces as well as in offline settings. And as you know, platformization of work also impacted sex work, and especially after the pandemic, we saw significant growth in online sex work. And this online sex work conducted through purpose-specific sex work advertising platforms. And sex work advertising platforms are the platforms where sex workers basically create a profile and advertise their services, and then in order to connect with their clients. So we are not talking about social media platforms or any other platforms, just to be clear. While ESWA's work previously focused significantly on understanding the impact of this platformization of work and what it means for sex workers from diverse backgrounds, we also wanted now to imagine a better future where the platforms align their design and features and policies with the needs of sex workers, which is the ethical thing to do, but also we believe beneficial for everyone, including the platforms themselves. Excuse me. So today at this event, we will launch ESWA's new community research report on sex work-centered platforms. And we have been working on this report since March 2024. And we will share our findings and our recommendations to help achieve a safer and more rights-affirming online working environment for sex workers. And we are thrilled to have Rebecca Franco here, who conducted this research for ESWA, and I had the pleasure really to work with in the last 6 months on the report. She will present for you our findings, and we will then have a more interactive discussion. But before that, we will first have a panel of discussion with activists from ESWA membership, representing their communities and in their respective countries. So let's dive in if everything is okay with you. So thank you to our panelists for joining us today to share their experiences. And I'm going to start asking questions, and then we will have a conversation. First, I would like to welcome Jackie from the Netherlands. Jackie is a sex worker and sex workers' rights activist. And I'm really happy to have you here. Jackie, can you hear us?
Yes, definitely. My
Okay,
pleasure to
great.
be here.
Great.
A lot of lovely people.
Yourself included. So thanks so much for being here. So you are from the Netherlands, and I wanna start the conversation with asking you, what is the importance of online sex work advertising platforms for sex workers in your context, especially because we know that there's lots of gentrification going on in the Netherlands that impact sex workers and their physical workspaces. Can you talk about that and how online platforms basically, kind of help sex workers navigate sex work?
Yes. Well, I started doing sex work 31 years ago, so I have seen the internet happening, and it's of huge importance in our lives, of course. But at the same time, I have seen the spaces of sex workers being, or they already have disappeared, or there is a lot of pushback. I'm sure the whole wide world knows that they want to close the red light district and move us to an erotic center. But it strikes me that this is happening everywhere in the world. They don't want anything to do with sex workers in the neighborhood. And also, you mentioned gentrification. It means that property is a very important part of our society. So this is where the money goes to. And it seems that we are not part of creating value to a neighborhood. So I have seen a lot of workspaces disappear. I used to be a field worker. I go everywhere in the Netherlands to reach out, and another brothel is closed, another working zone, street working zone is closed. It happens a lot, including closing of already about 200 windows in our famous red light district, which is a shame.
And how do the online platforms then come into place in this kind of environment where physical spaces are being reduced?
Well, in the old days, you could either work for an escort agency, work in a brothel, work behind a window, but there always was an intermediate. And suddenly, online, you could put your own profile and have a direct contact with the client. And a lot of people thought, okay, well, here now I really make money on my own. Of course, you need screening and all these tools, but it opened a perspective for a lot of people. And I always like more options for everyone. So I think you can work in many different ways. I mean, I know even people who work in, for instance, a private house, but also put their profile online to say, hey, today I'm there. So it's not one or the other. So I think it's a really great addition to our work to be able to work totally independent online.
Absolutely, yeah. Like you said, the choice, having choices, different choices are really important, especially for sex workers, so that everyone can, basically choose something that fits to their needs. And I guess my second question would be, platforms often argue then, they are simply there to provide an infrastructure. And you said, like platform work often comes off as, oh, I'm working for myself, and there's no impact of platform on how sex work is conducted. And so platforms often also say that, we are just here to provide an infrastructure, and we do not accept responsibility for, sex workers' health and safety. And what do you make of this? Do you think platform design and features or policies impact sex workers' health and safety?
Well, I feel platforms do too much. and they do too little. They do too much to be compliant to the government. They force us to do verification. They web scrape all our details and put this in another database and use it for AI and sell this to Europol. And I've been speaking to the ones who have the main platform in the Netherlands, and they say, oh, well, we just have to do it like this. And of course we could resist, but no, we don't. So they really don't care. And I feel they do too much. And on the other hand, when we have some demands, they don't care. They don't really see us as their clients. We are the ones that are paying to advertise online. So we are their clients, but they usually see our clients, I mean, the people where we offer our services to, as the clients of the platforms, which is not true. We are the ones paying. And it really strikes me that so many people complained to me about the verification through sending passports, which they store and will be leaked, hacked, or whatever is possible, which already happened in the Netherlands, in this case with client details. It already has been hacked. So I don't think they really have their security issues up to date. And it seems they also don't really care. So whenever we want something, we're not getting it. And a lot of people complain to me about, now I have to upload my face and my passport, and I don't like this. And all this time saying, well, then don't do it. Don't do it. Yes, but otherwise I run out of work. They feel really, really, really forced to do it, while so many people don't want it. And all the time I think, we have the power, we are the clients. If everyone would say no to them, we could change it. But I really understand that people need their daily bread. And of course, there's also this debate about reviews. And it seems they're not handling in our interest. Again, they don't see us as their paying clients to maintain this platform. They really give too much power to bad clients who write bad reviews about us with a purpose. So there is so much to improve on this level.
Absolutely, yeah. You are touching upon really important topics that sex workers and sex workers' rights organizations have been talking about for ages, such as age verification, such as reviews, and just generally, platform infrastructures that takes away control and agency from sex workers. And I mean, sex workers' rights organizations have been talking about the dangers of age verification for ages, but there was not really a movement happening outside of digital rights movements, such as sex workers' rights movements. So, but now at the EU level, for example, the age verification is now being discussed, and so that's now that's being discussed for general population. Digital rights organizations and other civil society organizations start to pay a bit more attention to these developments. So we always say sex workers are the canaries in the coal mine, which proves right once again. Thanks so much, Jackie. I will now go to Kali from Spain. Kali is a sex worker and sex workers' rights activist, and she is also a board member of ESWA, lucky for us. Hi, Kali, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Hey, everybody.
Nice to have you here.
Thanks for having me here. Very excited to be here. Always happy to be part of ESWA events and have interesting conversations about the various things that are affecting sex workers.
It's great to have you here as well. Thanks so much for your time. So I want to talk to you about the law. So sex workers, like online platforms are important for sex workers, but all around Europe and in the world as well, we see legal frameworks and laws against sex work and pornography kind of impacting these online platforms in very kind of destructive ways. Can you talk about, based on your context, your country's context, how does sex work regulations and these legal frameworks against sex work and pornography impact sex workers and online platforms?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to speak specifically to my context. I've worked in Ireland and Spain mostly. I've also worked in Norway and Germany, but we'll speak more about the context in Spain because of a recent law that was put in place that banned sex work advertising in Spain. So I'll speak more about that and kind of my experience also in Ireland. So where I live, I'm from Canada, but I live in Spain full time. Recently, just 2 years ago, there was a law that was put in place called the Sexual Freedom Law, or in Spanish, sí, which means yes is yes. And it sounds very good in theory. The law is about consent. You're like, yeah, okay, great. Let's end sexual violence. But this law then had like a little caveat that was like basically that they considered sex work a form of gender violence, and they moved to make sex work advertising illegal. It's also called the Irene Montero law. If you know her, she's all about, she's pretty against sex work, but all about gender stuff. But they also called the law after her because she really propelled it. So it was passed on October 7th, 2022. I remember sex workers knew that it was coming like months in advance, as we know with many things like Sesta and Fosta, and we cry out to the public being like, come and support us, to all our allies. We need you guys there. This is going to harm sex workers in a way that's unimaginable. And not enough people showed up. Not nobody showed up, but not enough people showed up, and they passed the law. So the law was used to hit sex work indiscriminately. Websites that advertise for prostitution or sex work could be slapped with, like, they technically be fined 100,000 euros. I haven't heard of any platforms that actually got fined, because all the platforms basically some of them shut down and some of them just moved domains, so they just got rid of the .es. But it's become very difficult in terms of advertising effectively and finding where you can, advertise directly. Actually, there's still a lot of, I know that in the sex work community, there's still a lot of confusion about what websites we can advertise on, which ones have better conditions and things like that. And it's still kind of like in our community, we're trying to share these resources, like, okay, I found this website that works better or whatever. So it was already difficult. I mean, sex work advertising in Spain was already really bad before this law was passed. It was just like, looks like something out of MySpace, looks like it's from 20 years ago. It's so antiquated, it's so hard to use, and this didn't make it easier because now there's so many other steps that are added. So in front of this law, basically sex workers, we've had to reinvent ourselves. We have, essentially, this law has made us have to do more work. It's so annoying, So part of the whole the new platform's approach is that, like, you can't actually say you're a sex worker in any way. You can say like you're a nice company, you're a cutie for hire, whatever, but you can't say for hire actually, but you can say like, I'm a cutie, I'm like a companion, I'm, all the things, like all these euphemisms, which is very difficult because some people just don't understand euphemisms, and that's completely understandable. Sometimes euphemisms go over my head too, you know what I mean? We can't assume that everybody understands euphemisms. So what happens now is, like, maybe people discovered this website, ABC, and they didn't know it was a sex work platform before, and then they discovered it. And because we can't announce ourselves as sex workers, potential clients think that this is like a dating website, like this is like an old version of Tinder, the original version of Tinder. So bad. Oh my God. I won't even name the websites because they're just so terrible. But so the clients don't understand that we're actually charging for our time. So what happens is we have to do a whole other layer of work. Clients will contact us and then we have to explain, oh yeah, we can meet you, but these are my conditions. And then they get really angry. They're like, why do you have to pay? Well, babe, because this is a sex work platform. It's just so discreet now, you know? So it's definitely had a direct impact on, you know, sex workers' income. We already knew that with Sesta and Fosta when they banned the advertising of sex services in the United States. That pushed so many more workers to the street or to rely on third parties, because if you can't get work, that's the option. Another thing that I find very frustrating is like, I guess using all these euphemisms, but also just not being able, like this kind of censoring of all of our photos. It's really, really creepy. The other day I was updating my ad and like I was just dragging the photos to like drop them, and they were all safe for work photos. So no nudity, whatever, not even photos of my underwear. But if I had even this part showing, it automatically, I'm not sure if it's the AI on the website, would put a red box over the photo being like, before you even upload it. So you don't even have to upload the photo, and they've already detected that this photo could be too revealing. And I'm talking about photos in t-shirts, you know, t-shirts and jeans that have been fully censored. So, you know, it's very hard for our clients to even understand that this is what we're doing. It also feels similar kind of to the censorship that I've experienced on platforms like Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, which has been like outright racist censorship. You know, I've had photos on Instagram of me in bikinis, you know, taken down that were flagged as solicitation, whereas my white counterparts, you know, I didn't have harsh experiences like that, you know, being non-consensually sexualized as a person of color, assume that I was selling services when, you know, I have an Instagram just to have fun, not to solicit there. But yeah, so basically, I mean, those are the main things. I've definitely, since the law has been passed, it's been very hard. The last 2 years have been very financially difficult for me and lots of other sex workers, because it's just, you can't really outright say that you're a sex worker, and it just creates a lot more work on our part. And the only people that really kind of understand that we're selling services are people that maybe were using those websites before. So clients that understood that, or that are up to date with the law, you know what I mean? Which is also, that's a lot to be asking of anybody, leave alone our clients that are, you know, not always, you know, the most up to date on sex worker laws.
Absolutely. Oh, sorry, were you done?
No, yeah, sorry. No, just this,
No,
like, it's just really, and it's also, it's just, I guess it's very frustrating. It's, you know, frustrating to have to do this extra work. I don't know, it's just a waste of our time. You know what I mean? There's already time wasters out there. Like, imagine just anybody who's a sex worker here knows that time wasters just comprise, you know, for me, at least 90% of my time. And then, you know, there's time wasters, and then there's just a completely clueless people out there that, you know, think this is Tinder. And I'm like, no, sweetheart, this is not, you know? But yeah, it's been confusing, because there's very little information about where we can go or what we can do about this, and very little recourse. But
yeah, I keep hearing from Spanish colleagues how difficult this law made their lives. I see there's a question. Is it okay if we go through this and then we will have a question and answer? Thank you. Could you also talk about, you already touched upon on that, the kind of experiences of racialized sex workers on online advertising platforms. I mean, we know that, you know, racialized sex workers experience different kind of, or more kind of intensified problems on social media, on, you know, other general purpose platforms. Do you see similar kind of trend in online advertising platforms where sex workers advertise their services?
yeah, I mean, I'm just going to speak to my own personal experience. I can't speak to the experience of every BIPOC. I hope you guys understand that, obviously. For me, what's really interesting is as sex workers, we're always kind of like trying to have our work validated, be seen as, have this validation for our work. But BIPOC sex workers are not only just seeking validation for our work, but also our struggle with racism that happens within sex work. So I think it's, we're doing double the work, and it's interesting because we have to jump through so many hoops, not just through advertising, but in our work in general, but also through advertising to avoid stigma associated with sex work, but also at the same time, stigma associated with our race, So it's a very, I'll explain a little bit later, I'll be really quick about this, but it's a very contradictory experience, at least for me. I find also in my own personal experience about advertising and just existing on the internet as a person of color, I have noticed that it's a very difficult thing to swallow for me. It's very painful. It's sometimes a very painful topic to talk about, but there is a racial pay gap. It's kind of the taboo. It's the elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about, but there is a racial pay gap, not just in sex work, in all forms of work, but specifically in sex work, it's very easy to see because people can put their, well, not in Spain, but in other countries where I've been, you can put your rates online. So you can directly compare yourself to your white counterparts and see that you're making, half or a third of what they're making. And that is really demoralizing, Even if I pay, absorbent amounts for advertising, I simply cannot ask the same fee as my white counterparts. I won't make it. Clients will often contact me trying to bargain my rates. It's also hard dealing with clients that are racist and tell me that I'm that I think too much of myself if I ask for what a white counterpart is asking for. I always make they'll try to write me and say, you think so highly of yourself. How could you ask this much money and stuff like that? I always tell them like a little joke. I'm like, oh, sweetheart, save up all your pennies. Maybe next year, you know what I mean? They definitely wanted to, take you down a peg, kind of bringing this up like as if as a brown person, I can't ask for the same as my white counterparts. I also find it's very weird because this has happened to me in Spain, but then when I go to Ireland, I can see, there's still a racial pay gap, but maybe it seems a little bit smaller. It's interesting because, I guess in different places, people are, in Spain, it's very, very acceptable to be openly racist, maybe in Ireland it's not so acceptable, or maybe they're more, they're trying to work around those things more, but at least my own experience, I find that in Spain, that's where I've experienced more racism in terms of advertising and, clients saying, horrible things to me. Although it could happen anywhere, obviously, racism knows no boundaries. Also, one of the things that I talked about that's kind of going to be contradictory is like experiencing this non-consensual exoticization online. So like one of the things that I do that's kind of contradictory is like I experience it when I'm talking to clients through platforms, and they're gonna make me exotic in some way or say something that's kind of that's not kind of, it's just straight out offensive. So what I do as like kind of a tactic to feel like I have more control, and this sounds contradictory, but for me it feels like I have more control, is I do it first. And I do it in a way that's like, hey, it's not my favorite thing, and maybe it's not for everybody, but this is a tactic that I use as a person of color advertising online, knowing that it's something that I'm going to be met with. It's like one of the hurdles that I'm going to face is, I try to have fun with it and be silly and kind of even over the top. I'm like, making fun of my clients without even them knowing, like being like, exotic Indian tigress ready to devour you. You know what I mean? Like something I'm obviously saying in a very sarcastic way, but if I have to deal with racism on platforms and clients going to say horrible things, let me try to be silly about it and making fun of them in a sarcastic way. They obviously don't know because it's an ad. They don't hear my tone of voice. Lastly, I'll be really, really quick. I know that I'm going over my time. So the rates are extremely different. Again, as I said, it's very hard to see that. I've even been admonished by white colleagues for having lower rates, but simply, when I've tried to put my rates at the same as a white sex worker, I simply don't, my phone is not I don't even get time wasters. When time wasters are not even calling you, that is a bad sign, nobody's calling, it's not a good thing, so it's hard to actually be able to raise our rates and ask what white colleagues are asking for. And, you know, it's very difficult. I think that we have to like acknowledge that there are systems of oppression in sex work. You know, the fact that BIPOC are rarely able to advertise as luxury or high end because of the racism that we face in our work, but also society at large. I also know of BIPOC, I can't do this specifically, but I know of other BIPOC that maybe are mixed race that are able to kind of present themselves in their ads as more white in order to avoid discrimination. So they try to use this white passing, which is also, it must be really difficult in order to like kind of try to hide one of your identity. We're already trying to hide one of our identities as sex workers because of the stigma we face, but then trying to hide your identity as a person of color and try to water it down as a white person. I mean, to be as close as you can to a white person is also very, it's humiliating. It's not okay, you know? It also, again, you know, of course, white passing comes with people, I mean, it comes with privilege as well. If you're white passing, you're able to kind of play with that line. I can't, unfortunately, white pass. You know, I could try to, you know, people used to make this joke when I was younger. They're like, oh yeah, if you work at this Italian restaurant, you have to be some sort of Italian. So I'm like, okay, I'm the Sicilian. I don't know, like the darkest olive skin, but like, it's very difficult, obviously, for people that have features like, you know, distinct noses or, you know, eyes that aren't, you know, lighter color. So there is also kind of some social capital in that sense. And yeah, like also the last thing I'm going to say is like about platforms, it's so frustrating to have to spend so much money to like, I'm spending all this money, like, you know, in Ireland, I think it's 120 euros for a week. And if you want to be at the top, it's another 120 euros. And if you want to have activations, another 120 euros, whatever. I'm paying all this money to also, you know, live this kind of level of violence from, you know, racist violence. So it's very frustrating to exist as a person of color on platforms, and obviously I have the privilege of having papers, so I'm lucky that I'm able to do the verification. You know, there's also so many colleagues that are not able to advertise on websites because they require this verification and your papers to be to be corresponding with the country you're in. So, you know, that's also creates another whole two-tiered system of people that are able to access platforms. That's even a luxury or a massive privilege. You know, there's a lot of my colleagues that aren't able to access platforms because they don't have the papers because of this age verification thing. So that also, you know, pushes migrant and BIPOC sex workers into more situations of violence or precarity and unstable work.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Yeah, 100%. I mean, you know, there are so many examples of, we think technology as something neutral, but actually it's, you know, laden with politics and so many values, and you know, usually enforces the social political structures that we live in. Last but not least, I want to go to Borche. Hi, Borche, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great, yes, we can hear you. So Borche is from Macedonia, and he is the coordinator of STAR, the first sex workers collective in the Balkans, which is a member of ESWA. He's a sex worker and a community activist. Glad that you are here, Borche. I know that STAR prepared a report and published it, I think last year, correct me if I'm wrong, on digital rights and digital security of sex workers in North Macedonia. And it was really interesting to see how much overlaps basically there are, you know, with outside of European Union and, you know, countries that are in the European Union and outside of the European Union. Can you talk about a bit of the highlights of your report? What did you find regarding online sex work advertising platforms in North Macedonia?
Thank you, Igit, for inviting me to be on this call today. I'm really happy to be here among over 40 participants on the call. It's for sure a successful one. So congratulations on this. So yes, actually, STAR last year did a good research, an excellent research on the digital rights of sex workers in the country. I would like to point three highlights from the research. The first one is going to be like the language and accessibility challenge for sex workers to use these platforms. Then imbalanced policies and economic impact, and then safety and support deficiencies. When it comes to language and accessibility challenges, sex workers in North Macedonia, like everywhere, use platform to advertise escort services, such as you have heard, for example, for City of Love, then Atlas Escort, then Eurogirls Escort, then Grindr, Tinder, and etc. As well as some online advertisers. It is less often that sex workers here in North Macedonia use sites with pornographic content, where they post videos and contact numbers. We normally use social media and direct chat applications to communicate with the potential clients. So the terms and conditions to use these platforms constitute an agreement between the users, sex workers from one side, and then the clients from the other sides. So none of these platforms are available in Macedonian or Albanian. The only site, according to our research, is the City of Life, which is available exclusively in English. So this presents a serious barrier, for which reason it can be assumed that a large portion of sex workers in North Macedonia don't know and couldn't know what they are agreeing to at the end of the day. So the platforms are not designed in such a way that the terms and conditions of use and privacy policies also are not part of the main menus on the platform, but rather they are placed at the bottom of the web page in a very, very small font. Other than requiring to check the box that you agree, of course, to the terms and conditions, the platforms make no other effort to promote and ensure the users read and understand the terms and conditions. Among all escort services advertising platforms used by sex workers in North Macedonia, the very first thing that can be observed is the imbalance of data required by sex workers as opposed to the clients. For example, clients don't have to register to see the ads in their entirety, but only if they want to leave a review. Even if they register and leave recommendation reviews, only the name under which they register and no other informations are available at all. So on the platforms, there is an options for clients to report abuse by a special report abuse button, all this, let's say, all this lack of platform availability in Macedonian or Albanians, because most of the clients are Albanians here in Macedonia. All of this, creates some significant barriers that can deeply impact our safety, our rights, and also our ability to navigate online space effectively. So what I want to say is that without proper translation into Macedonian or Albanians, we might struggle to, let's say, fully understand the platform's terms of service, privacy policies. Many sex workers are not familiar, with what platform's terms of services means, actually, privacy policy, user agreements, and etc. Also, let's say that the lack of transparency that have been noted among the sex workers who participated in the research makes it harder to access legal protections, or also to understand how to report issues. This can lead to losing trust in the platform, causing sex workers to seek safer or even more transparent alternatives, let's say. So in order to improve the accessibility, platforms, all these dating platforms or escort platforms should offer full translations, then clear terms in easily understandable formats, and also involve sex workers in the design process to ensure that our needs are met at the end of the day, of course.
Amazing. Thanks so much for the overview. And please feel free to put the link to your report in the chat as well for people to reach to this important report by Star. Thank you so much, everyone. That was our panel, and I hope you see the kind of the wide kind of like many problems basically that our panel speakers were talking upon, which unsurprisingly all of these and more problems came up during our research on online advertising platforms, and which we will now go into that. Following that, we will have a Q&A session, so please keep your questions ready. So, the big moment. It's my pleasure to introduce Rebecca Franco, who undertook this research for ESWA. And honestly, it was such a pleasure to work with you, Rebecca, and thanks so much for all your work. Rebecca will now present research findings, and we will see how platforms can be designed and governed in a way that truly centers the needs and rights of sex workers.
Yeah, thank you so much, Yiğit. And same, it was such a pleasure to work together. Can everybody see my screen and the presentation?
Yes.
Yeah, great. Okay. Oops. Okay. So yeah, it was so good also to hear from the panelists and hear all the issues that came up in these different contexts, right? So for this ESWA research, we looked pan-European, and I think it really, these different problems came back in our findings. And in this project that we did for this research, we zoomed out a bit. But yeah, you have these localized issues of gentrification and legalization in the Netherlands, which then leads to legal requirements of ID verification, or in Spain, what Kelly was talking about the specific racism, exacerbated racism in Spain, and the conflation of gender-based violence with legal sex work, leading then to the closing of platforms, or the language and translation problems in North Macedonia. And I think it's really good to kind of like set the stage of these localized problems, but then that also have that there are more general problems when you look at a little bit like a higher level pan-European, which is what we did for the report. So for this report, it's part what you said of the digital rights program, and the focus was really of how to censor sex workers' needs on advertising platforms. So I'll present the main findings of the report, So first, I want to say something about why we do this research. Why did we do this research? I'll mention something about the method, so what we did, and then of course what we found. And in what we found, I'm really going to zoom into the specific considerations that sex workers have when using platforms, and what type of recommendations that follow from that for platforms to improve how their platform functions in order to better center sex workers. Okay. So first, a little general why it's important to do this kind of work. Of course, many of you have already encountered the problems with platforms, and there's been a lot of also talk within the community, but also academic research that has been done on advertising platforms. And with this work, we want to see, okay, then what are the common contestations that come out, and what can platforms do in order to improve it? So why are platforms important for sex workers? Like was already mentioned, for example, by Jackie, it really has a potential to facilitate the finding of clients without the use of specific intermediaries, like, for example, brothel, and also without having to be vulnerable to street-based policing, like when you work on the streets. So platforms really can facilitate safety strategies of sex workers by, for example, screening clients or perhaps asking for deposits, and other types of tools that people use. It can also form a basis to connect and share some information online, which has already been happening, of course, also within the face of the moderation and banning of content produced by sex workers. So it has the potential to give opportunities for workers to improve their working conditions, but it also comes with different risks. And this is because, yes, platforms are in a way ways for workers to connect with clients directly, but it doesn't mean that they don't affect and impact the working conditions of people on these platforms. So, for example, platforms can drive down labor standards through the design of the platform. They can also, which we already heard from Kali, really increase the burden of unpaid labor by having to engage with time wasters. It can also exclude people. So, for example, migrant workers who don't have the right papers, or perhaps people who need to be able to access work fast and don't have the time to go through these platforms, which can take a couple of days. You have to communicate with clients, et cetera, et cetera. And then, of course, a big problem are the digital security risks, both in terms of exposure to the outside world, for example, clients, but also the data through, for example, data leakages, but also the exposure to, for example, law enforcement, which can use platforms to police workers. Okay, so both opportunities and risks. So how can we mitigate these risks and improve the opportunities, which is to then better safeguard workers' health and safety and also uphold their labor and human rights. So in order to think through these questions, we carried out focus groups. I also already saw some people who were part of the focus groups, which is great, which we carried out in Madrid back in April. And it was with 21 workers. We did like a large group in which discussed the common problems and needs of workers. And then we also had some smaller discussion groups. We also carried out interviews, one-on-one interviews with sex workers across Europe. And also, which was really helpful, with platform representatives of people who are designing or running platforms and have a specific consideration for how they are centering sex workers' needs. And with this together, we got to the different findings. So what is important in understanding what workers need from platforms is to understand that, of course, there's such a diversity of workers, and all of these people are going to have different needs depending on the specific context in which they work, the different identities they inhabit, perhaps the type of work that they do, the niche of work that they do. But we still found that there was a broad consensus of how we can improve, or how platforms can improve the rules, the features, and the design in order to better center workers' needs. And I'll talk through them with you. And we organized them in three kind of like parts. So I'll talk a little bit about the different problems that workers encounter, and then what kind of actionable efforts platforms can implement in order to attend to these needs of workers. So I'll talk about accessibility and the ease of use of platforms, the control that workers need over their advertisements, and then the data protection and the privacy issues that people encounter, and how platforms can improve that. Okay. Again, I don't see myself, so I'm literally talking to my screen right now. Okay. So first of all, something that came up, and which I also heard the panelists say, is when we talk about the accessibility and the ease of use, is a problem of the costs of platforms, right? Some platforms, it really depends on where you work, but some platforms can be incredibly expensive. And in that sense, indeed, the workers are the clients of the platforms, because they are actually, the business model of the platform is dependent on what workers pay to the platform. And these costs can be really, really high, which then also excludes workers. So there are platforms in Switzerland that can cost up to 370 Swiss francs, around, how much is that? 400 euro? Yeah, even more in euros.
190, I think.
400 and?
190 euros.
190, thank you. And even when platforms might have lower costs, it can still be really difficult for workers to pay those costs in advance without knowing when you're going to get a return for that. So costs are definitely an issue for workers. Another problem is the very counterintuitive interface that a lot of platforms have. For example, Leo remarked that these have not been upgraded since the 90s, and that the platforms look really horrible. So that's an aesthetic issue. But beyond the aesthetic, it's also really about being able to navigate those platforms in a way that makes sense to you, especially because a lot of people have to work across different platforms, right? So you might have advertisements on all these different platforms with their own interface, and all of these are difficult to navigate and to understand, which will again take up more of your time, and also leads to frustration. So a first point that we center in the report is the accessibility and the ease of use. And therefore, we call on platforms to develop intuitive designs, to really focus on keeping the costs low, and perhaps also experiment with or think of different ways of plans of payments that don't necessarily have to be all in advance at once for an entire month, right? So that people have like flexibility in how they pay. Like also was mentioned, the problem in North Macedonia, there's a problem with the terms and conditions that can be difficult to understand. So these needs to be developed in an easy language that is understandable. And also for example, migrant workers or people who use platforms in a different language than their own, it is important to have a language support, because if you don't know the terms and conditions, and you cannot get your account verified because it's so counterintuitive and the explanation is in a language you don't understand, you won't be able to put your advertisement online, and you'll be excluded from a platform and have difficulties doing the work you need to do. So that's our first point. Another thing that came up a lot, which is quite broad, is the need to have control over the types of advertisements you do. So platforms they allow you to get in touch with clients, to find clients, but they really create the space in which you can do that. So they will tell you whether you're allowed to put specific things in your description, how your photos should look, whether there will be reviews on your advertisement, and all of those things control the way that you can do your work. So what really came up is the importance that workers can decide themselves how they're going to do their pricing, how they're going to describe their services, what type of photos they want to use, because all of that will allow them to find the right clients in a way that reduces workload and also risks. So for example, here's Kiwi from Poland, who's really talking about the difficulty of, on the one hand, wanting to clarify your service and pricing to avoid countless back and forth with potential clients. And on the other hand, if you put too much information on your description, then you also will get people who just want to talk for fun without getting to a paid service. So there's one of the platform representatives that I spoke to was really talking about wanting to not be paternalistic about the way that workers should advertise, but allow workers the control over it. So they say, we thought we'd give people options because we know that some people don't want to mention their race in their advertising. Other people's are like, no, this is actually a key part of how I advertise. So rather than being paternalistic, oh no, we're above all these labels, we want to give these people a free choice, as free of a choice as possible. And here it's really about the control of workers to be able to determine themselves how best to do this. Another problem and a consideration that came up for people is the safety measure. So like what I mentioned, platforms can really allow workers to implement safety measures, but at the same time, platforms can also make it more difficult or make it easier for people to implement those safety measures. So in certain instances, platforms make it more difficult. For example, the platforms will tell clients to watch out for scams and tell them to actually not give deposits. So this is really difficult then for sex workers to ask for deposits if a platform is deliberately and consciously stopping clients from doing so or advising against it. And for example, Diana from Germany finds it very difficult to ask for the screening practices that she wants to do because clients are not used to it, right? So they won't send it. And other people, and for example, platforms I spoke to are really thinking about how they can improve or nudge clients towards giving screening, towards partaking in screening practices. So here we see platforms actually really trying to encourage these safety measures, or at least allow workers to use these safety measures if they so want to, by encouraging the clients to get used to it. Another problem that came up a lot, or let's say a point of contestation, which Jackie also already mentioned, is the reviews. With reviews, again, we see that there's a lot of workers who find it incredibly problematic to work with reviews, because you will have clients who can leave negative reviews even without having met you, and might be, harass you. And at the same time, you will need reviews in order to attract clients, or for clients to think that, you're basically like a real person. So I heard a lot of people say how much they hated reviews, even though some people were positive about the impact that the reviews had on their own work. They were often still negative about it, because they understood that you were in a way kind of vulnerable to whatever the client wants to say. So here Lola, who's working in the UK, was really saying how much she hated it. Whereas Daniel from Norway, for him, it was really helpful because it helped him kind of attract clients. So there we see quite a lot of differences in what workers need. So I'll speak about it in a second, but here again, it's important that the workers have control over whether they will want to allow reviews, whether they can delete reviews, and with what kind of consequences that has then over your profile if you do delete the reviews. Another issue that comes up a lot, and a need for people, is to be able to have control and manage their account in a way that works for them. So a lot of people will want to change their advertisements quite promptly, because maybe you're touring and you want to set the location somewhere else, or perhaps you're updating your photos, your services, your prices. You need to be able to do that quickly and effectively. Whereas what we see in reality is that a lot of platforms take a long time to manage, to verify, to kind of like make changes on your account, perhaps won't even answer when you do so, which can have really difficult consequences. Also in this example by Louise, it's, for example, if you're exiting sex work and you can't access the account. So what a lot of people were bringing up was the importance of changing your account, your description, and your advertisement whenever you needed to, and that it would be verified and processed quite quickly, because it's a type of work where people's working practices can really change from one day to the other. And in order to do that, it's really important to have a clear line of communication with the platform. A lot of platforms are incredibly unresponsive and really frequently quite rude towards the people that are funding their business, right? Workers fund the business of the platform. So here Kiwi sharply remarks that the platform is mostly made to make money off us. When they respond, they don't really care about anything you need. They just care about their own rules. So there's this incredible inequality of power in the communication with the platform and sex workers that is causing problems because people really need kind of like that service from the platform in order to do the work that they need to do. So coming from this, we recommend that platforms implement that all workers are able to set their own prices and in the way that they want. So however they want to connect it, for example, to time, to services, etc., that they're able to describe their services in the way that they want. So Kali was already talking about the difficulties of not being able to use the actual terminology and describe the services in your advertisement and how difficult that makes the work that you do. So workers need to be able to describe their advertisement, their services in the way that they want, and also to control the reviews. If they want to use reviews, that's possible. If they don't want to use it, that's also possible. Then platforms should invest in prompt account verification and modification. So if people want to change their account or advertisement, they should invest in clear communication line, and it's also incredibly important that they support sex workers in implementing safety strategies. So rather from discouraging clients from, for example, doing screenings, they can build in the process of booking, in the booking systems, in the way that they give the resources, for example, articles for clients on how workers should implement their safety or explaining safety strategies of workers and how important it is to do, for example, screening. And then the last part that I'll talk about in terms of the different needs of workers is data protection and privacy. So workers working online are exposed to visibility, which of course you need in order to find clients. You need to be on advertising on the internet in order to find the clients through the internet. But that visibility is really can be really difficult as well for people, because it also exposes you to the gaze of clients, the general public, and law enforcement. So being online comes with the risks of, for example, client harassment, right? Being online can come with the risks of the police checking where you are. And being online can lead to data leakages, which could have even further problems for your safety. So when it comes to data of sex worker, it's really any type of data is potentially sensitive data, and being online is something that people are really managing. So what we found is that workers are navigating that visibility. So, for example, Alessandra says that she's very worried about being online, so she wouldn't put a picture of her full face because all of the content that you upload to the internet stays there, she remarks. But at the same time, her not showing her face also reduces a lot of the work because clients, they do want to see her full face. So when I upload, she says, when I upload my ad without my face, it reduces a lot of the contact with the clients. And so sometimes she will actually upload her face because she needs to work, but it also exposes her a lot. So workers manage visibility and therefore also need to be able to change their advertisements at different moments and swiftly. So kind of like speaking again to what I was mentioning about changing your advertisements. Oops. Then what I mentioned is also the exposure towards law enforcement. So here X, who works in Spain and Portugal, remarks that being online and having your data out there, your face out there, it's a security thing. I don't want to put all of these explicit things and have them get thrown back in my face. Heavens forbid that anything ever happens or me being stopped by the police. So here she refers directly to the risk of being exposed to the police. And now we're talking about data that is visible online, for example, in your advertisements, your photos, your descriptors, but also the other end of the data of the things you upload onto the platform that might not be directly visible, but that could very well leak in data leakages, or, for example, the law enforcement raiding a platform and collecting all of these documentation. So now we're talking about the publicly visible data and the back-end data. Then an important topic, which was already touched upon a bit in the panel, is ID and age verification. So many platforms, they ask for ID verification either ID or age verification, or both. ID then being a government issued documentation that you have to upload to the platform, or age verification, which is often biometric face scans to kind of like estimate how old you are. And a lot of platforms use either both of these tools or both. Which causes a lot of problems for workers depending on the levels of vulnerability that they have. So, for example, migrant workers might have more problems with this, but in general, the people that I spoke to were all really worried about age verification and ID verification, because it's also really scary. Again, whatever data you give over to those platforms is sensitive data. So here Diana remarks that in order to get verified, you have to send an uncovered, unedited video of yourself, and then some webmaster, we don't know who, will check it and mark your profile as verified. And this is what I find extremely, extremely bad, because I personally hide my face. So, this thing about letting them see me just in order to get verified, I don't like that. I don't like that at all. And so, for example, platform representative who is developing a platform was really trying to figure out how she could best deal with this, because they don't want to ask for ID verification, and they also really don't want to store it and keep that data. But at the same time, which I'll talk about in a minute, they also need to comply with legislation. So this is also sometimes that that can be a difficult consideration for platforms. But the problem is what we see now is most of the platforms don't even consider it, don't even think about the risks of that it poses to workers, a lot of kind of like the bigger mainstream platforms, and importantly, don't give any guarantees of how they will save it, how they will safely store it, how they will process the data, how they will protect your data. They just ask for data, ask, and never tell you how they will safeguard it. And that's a huge problem. So coming from that, we call upon platforms to limit the data collection, not only the collection, but also the storage of the data, right? I mean, you can always, I used to buy my little bottle of alcohol when I was younger and get ID. They check your ID and then you keep your ID, and the person never stores the data that is on your ID. Now these platforms are storing all of the data on that ID. So really limiting the storage of the data, investing and implementing strong data protection measurements, but also, so this is on the collection of the data, but also then give the workers control on what they want to make visible on their advertisements, so that they're not exposing everything at all times to the wider public. And also invest in tools to control the images that are online. For example, watermarking. There are lots of different tools that another research by ESWA also foregrounds in their recommendations on digital image abuse. And then a big problem, which we're also seeing now with development across kind of like regulation of the internet is more and more biometric data usage for age verification. And following also digital rights organization, ESWA calls to avoid this biometric data usage, because basically there are not enough reasons to do so, and the safety measures that are out there right now are not enough to make it kind of like worth it. So here again, I just want to reiterate a quote by X again about this data security, where she says, "Honestly, for me, data security is the most important thing. I want to know what measures are in place to prevent hacking. I want assurance about how they protect our data." So this is really key. And while right now I mostly spoke about what platforms can do, I think it's actually incredibly important to zoom out a little bit and understand this wider legal and social context in which these things are happening, because so much of the problems that I just highlighted are created or exacerbated, or the environment for these problems are created by this larger context. So for example, ID verification, it was really difficult for Lola, who's a trans migrant woman, to open an account on the platform, because she came to the UK in a work visa and she was really scared to give her ID. So that made it really difficult for her to access the platform. And this wider legal and social context of having work visas, of having repressive migration regimes, makes it more difficult for migrant workers to then do these types of verifications, right? So, and another thing, for example, Kira in Sweden, where the demand is criminalized, we see that the platforms are navigating the laws and the rules in ways that are posing the risks onto sex workers even more. So, for example, Kali talked about the criminalization now of these platforms in Spain. So what do these platforms do? They move their servers overseas and kind of change their rules that in the end only make it more difficult for workers. So, for example, in Sweden, it's a little bit the same. The servers are not in Sweden, and the way that they operate is mostly kind of like protecting the clients. So these platforms are, like in Poland, really encouraging clients to not pay in advance and to kind of like frame workers like scammers. So this is the wider legal and social context that is stigmatizing sex workers. Another thing is that law enforcement also really directly uses platforms in order to surveil workers, and that through the uses of the platform, workers become vulnerable to police violence. So, for example, Alessandra in Spain, who's also a migrant trans woman, had her apartment raided because police used passion.com. And once they had the address, they booked an appointment and came to check if there were other girls, what I was doing, and how I ran things. And they were, repressive towards Alessandra. So what we see is that this larger legal and social context is really creating the grounds for platforms to not care about the needs of the workers and to circumvent or navigate legislation in ways that makes workers more vulnerable, rather than focusing on their labor rights, their human rights, their digital rights, and creating platforms that compete with one another on the rights of sex workers rather than on driving down the labor standards. So that's why decriminalization is so important, because decriminalization is really the only way to remove these legal barriers and also addressing the stigma around sex workers in order to encourage platforms to prioritize sex workers' needs without having that pressure to comply with laws that actually end up undermining safety and autonomy. So that's why it's essential for platforms that they are able then to design the features and the rules that actually uphold sex workers' rights. And we need decriminalization to be able to hold platforms accountable for fostering these safer, fairer workplaces, for example, giving data protection assurances, et cetera, et cetera. Let me see the time. Oh, great. Okay. So just to reiterate, the main recommendations that we're talking about in the report is the importance of incorporating sex workers' perspective in the design of the platforms, but also throughout the working of the platform, to then have those sex workers' perspectives undergird the platform rules and design in terms of accessibility, in terms of control over their working practices. And so, for example, listings and advertisements, and to have foreground data protection and privacy. We also give recommendations how platforms can also facilitate the client's education and provide sex workers resources on the platform. And then, of course, within a larger regulatory context in which sex work is decriminalized and instead foregrounds and focuses on sex workers' rights, their digital rights, their human rights, their labor rights as the basis of the regulatory framework. So I really invite you to look at the report on ESWA's website, in which all of these issues are given much more detail and attention. But this is really just to give a good overview of what the report is all about. Thank you so much for your time. And yeah, I'll be really happy to answer any questions that you might have. And I'm going to stop sharing. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. It was great. So this is our report. Thank you. So I shared a little message in the chat. So we have a call to action. Please download and read and share widely this report with your networks. In the link I dropped, we have the full report, and then we have the summary, especially to be sent to online sex work advertising platforms, because we don't expect people to read the whole report sometimes. So if you're an academic who has contacts with online sex work advertising platforms, if you're a sex worker working on these platforms, if you're a journalist, happen to have contacts with these platforms, please send these reports or the summary, and invite them, to engage with sex workers on their platform and implement the measures that we highlight in ESWA's report. Because change can happen, and change does happen. We see more and more at ESWA platforms, newly developing platforms, coming to us and asking for engagement with us, knowing our work. So it is difficult, it's challenging, but we can, I think, make a difference. Now we have 10-15 minutes to have some questions for our panelists or for Rebecca. Floor is yours. Please put a hand up and I'll let you do. Absolutely, they need us actually. Robbie.
Great, thank you so much for the incredible talks and the amazing panel. I just had a question mainly for Rebecca, which kind of came up for me, which was lots of the different participants you were talking at, you referenced in your talk were in countries with very different legal frameworks surrounding how sex work is policed. And I wondered if you kind of saw any variation within how the platform functions based on these different legal frameworks. I know that a lot of platforms, they have to operate in ways to kind of, like as Callie was saying, in terms of they have to be very careful about how you can advertise yourself so that they avoid the over-policing. And then this kind of nested part of that as well was going back to this idea of companies operating their businesses outside of the jurisdiction where the platform operates. And I wondered if you came across that at all within the research, and if and how you think that relates to questions surrounding accountability and holding the platforms to account so that they do engage with sex workers.
Yeah, thanks. Shall I just answer immediately, or do you want to? Yeah, I think that's a very important point. So there are a lot of differences between platforms and even how people can work on them depending on where they are. I think a really good example, for example, is what Jackie also mentioned at the beginning, is that in a place where, like in the Netherlands, where it's legalized, and in order to comply with the law, you actually have to ask for ID. So if you want to operate legally in the Netherlands, you need to do that. In other places where it's not regulated under these types of legislation, you don't necessarily have to ask for ID. So I think that's an important example of how it can affect the work that you can do. Other things is I've spoken to platforms who might, for example, be afraid of giving resources to sex workers, because then under the third party, like the criminalization of third parties, they might not be able to assist sex workers, because then they can be criminalized under this legislation, and then they cannot fulfill the role that they might want to take of providing those resources. And that's, in that sense, really localized, because in the Netherlands that would not be a problem, right? A lot of platforms, that being said, a lot of platforms don't have their servers in the countries where they operate. And it can have really various reasons. I heard of platforms, they have their servers in like Cyprus and Iceland, What happens is that basically because they're operating in jurisdictions where there is less regulatory oversight, they don't have to, because a lot of platforms are in jurisdictions where they can operate, or they have their server in another jurisdiction just so that they can serve sex workers. But it also means that they can have more scrupulous business practices. There are platforms that are literally scraping other platforms and just putting advertisement up on their platform, and they can't be, they could, but nobody is caring about them, about that, right? So here we're really talking about very intensely scrupulous practices that are putting workers at an immense amount of risk, undercutting their prices, their services, taking their data, and we don't hear governments talking about how bad this is. So I think that is also just facilitated by platforms not competing in terms of having good conditions for workers, but more about various other things just in order to make more money. And that's more easy when you're in places that are not under regulatory oversight. And then regulatory oversight is another question, because I don't trust the governments necessarily either. But that's, yeah.
Thank you, Rebecca. Any other questions? Arik.
Hey,
Sorry for pronouncing it wrong. You can
no.
yourselves, by the way, if you feel comfortable with.
No, Arik is the right pronunciation. Thanks. So my name is Arik. I'm the co-founder of Choice. So we are so for the past 1.5 years, been trying to develop a booking platform we introduced new terminology for the market, so we call it paid companionship and intimacy, and paid intimacy would then include sex work. So I had a question actually for Kali on Spain legislation. I got a report by the collective Otras, like it's a 206-page report or something. So I was just wondering, with a proposal, like very specific proposal, I guess, on decriminalization and inclusion in the work law or workers' rights law in general. So I was just wondering, I think it was a couple months ago, so whether you knew about it or whether there was like any progress or feedback on it, or I don't know.
I actually, can you hear me? No?
Yeah.
Am I muted? Okay.
Yeah.
No, because normally it says this little green like box when you're talking, and it wasn't. To be honest, I didn't know about that. That good on them. 200 pages. Wow, it's a little Bible there. No, I haven't really heard about that. I haven't heard of any advances in terms of like anything being changed, or if they were thinking about changing the law. I just know that everyone's kind of migrated to, like, we've just all kind of it's kind of incredible. No, we've just accept this is the new normal or whatever, and I know a lot of sex workers just kind of moved on, but that's great. Did you read it?
I can share it.
Okay, wow,
not all of it, but
200 pages is a lot of dedication, but like, yeah, I don't know, it's kind of, it also is like, when we're hearing everyone speak and stuff, it's very frustrating, because I think that sometimes we just accept this as the new normal, and like, okay, well, I guess this is what's going to happen now. Like, same with Sesta and Fosta, it was like so frustrating. It had such lasting damage on our community, and we've kind of just had to become resilient and think of other ways, and like that's kind of just the history of sex work, isn't it? Just us coming up against so much pushback, and then us just finding other ways around, but I hadn't heard of this.
So I just shared it in the chat. It's quite extensive.
Oh my God, yeah,
I thought it was an interesting,
add it to my light
very specific proposal. And then I also had I see other hands, so I'll let the others go first.
Oh, thank you. That's so nice of you. Maria.
Hi, I also have a question for Kali. I'm actually from Austria. I'm working for the project S6A here in Graz. And the project exists like around 15 years. I just started like 1 year ago, something like this, to work. And my question actually regards Spain, because in the last time, I'm also in the health department, because here in Austria, the sex workers, they are actually forced to have regular checkups like every 6 weeks. And there, in the registration process, in the recent time, I met many sex workers from Spain. So they're coming from Spain. And whenever I ask, like, can you just tell me, like, how actually Austria, like, how do you choose Austria? Like, just out of curiosity, they said that actually they found some advertisement in Spain. And I wanted to ask you if you know about it, or have you encountered them until now? Because we were not aware that actually Austrian advertisement, it works in Spain, and how does that work?
But it's interesting. Are you asking me the question if I've seen Austrian advertising?
If you've seen something like this, yeah, exactly. That's my question.
No, to be honest, I haven't seen anything like that. But I will say that because of the law being passed, the sexual freedom law, the CSC, basically what a lot of us had to do is, well, some of us got pushed to, a third party, some of us got pushed to work on the streets, and some of us just got pushed to like, okay, well, I guess I'm going to have to be a touring sex worker now, which is, so that's why actually the last 2 years I've been working nonstop in Ireland and more in Germany, because I can't find it's so hard. I mean, the advertising was already bad, like I said, in Spain before. So maybe that's why you're seeing an increase in sex workers, like using other platforms to advertise. That could be probably.
But the thing was that actually that it was not coming from the sex workers, that there were the ads, some ads, as I understood, actually from Austrian platforms, I don't want to go wrong, or actually like clubs and so on. And actually the curiosity was how this reach like sex workers in Austria, in Spain.
I mean, it's probably that them being like taking advantage of like the situation that sex workers aren't like, we can't advertise in Spain, or it's very difficult to advertise in Spain, and be like, here's a new market, because I mean, in the end, platforms are businesses, right? And exactly. So like they probably saw this market being like, oh, these sex workers are probably getting desperate because it's more difficult to advertise, this whole extra layer of work that we have to do. What if we advertise to some people in Spain? I mean, it's not the stupidest idea. I mean, I know a lot of sex workers that are now advertising in other countries because we simply can't get enough work in Spain. It's difficult. So like, I see a lot of people flocking. Like I've tried to go unsuccessfully tour outside of Spain. It's difficult, especially if you have to go to a new country and you don't know how the rules work in Austria. Or for example, in my case, I went to Norway and it was really bad idea for me. It didn't work at all, was not successful at all. Just, time wasters times 1,000. But yeah, maybe that's why they're like, they realize that there's a kind of a market for that. And then they're appealing more to people working in the Spanish context, being like, come over.
The single thing which I actually observed, and that's a problem, like it's from one side Austria, because it's legalized, so actually they can work here, that's fine. But the problem is when it comes to the visa. So many times it can happen that they come here, and if they do not have a European citizenship, then they need a work permit. And often the thing is just, for example, the visa applies for Spain and not for Austria. And many times, there are like regular controls from the side of the police, and very quickly can happen that they're going to be sent back. Yeah. So that's maybe it's useful also for you, Kali, if you hear or someone wants to come, that if they have a regular permit also for Europe to work in this job, because that can happen that maybe they can just stay here 1-2 weeks and they're going to be sent back after.
Thanks for letting me know. That's interesting.
Thank you so much,
You're welcome. Thank you.
I want to go through a couple of more questions because we are out of time. Xavier.
Hi, everyone. I'm Xavier. I'm a co-owner of one of the sex work platforms operating in the Netherlands. We're called Wink.link. My colleague was one of the people that participated in the study that Rebecca did. So I'm here representing and just learning and meeting more people in the community. And one of the things that we're trying to figure out that was mentioned in the presentation was ID and age verification and the risks posed to sex workers by holding copies of personally identifiable information, mostly like security issues related to that. And so one of the things that we've been investigating is the possibility of not keeping copies of these IDs on our platform. And we've had kind of a dubious, unclear answer from counseling on the possibilities here for the countries that we're operating, which is Belgium, Netherlands, and Germany. And so we've been told that we could probably win in court if we did have issues or like deplatformed from payment processors for not having copies of the IDs, if we were to prove that we verified IDs. And one of the ways we could do that is in person. And so one of the things we're considering is adding an additional way to verify with our platform, which is to do an in-person verification where a person signs off that they verified your age and ID, but that then we don't keep a copy of the ID. So ultimately what we're looking at, the choice here for as a platform is potentially getting deplatformed from payment processors, but at the risk of having to go to court and do a big legal battle. And so that's one of the conundrums that we're facing. But I guess it's more of a call to action to, like, if there's ideas here on how we could approach this with the power of, you know, creative thinking, how we can deal with this, trying to find a solution here.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here, Xavier. And yeah, like at ESWA, we really push for this age verification through ID collection, mass collection of IDs and storing to be scrapped. But for that, we actually, like you said, like we actually need political will. And that's why part of our work is for advocating for decriminalization of sex work and kind of, you know, broader work on destigmatizing sex work as well. And at the EU level, like I mentioned before, like there are conversations from the Commission to introduce age verification for social media platforms, for example, which all digital rights organizations are now, you know, kind of, oh my God, what's happening? This is so intrusive, and we are like, you know, yeah, that's been happening for sex workers for ages now. And the European Commission wants to build a system where the ID is sent to a kind of intermediary platform where the information is checked, but then the ID is not stored there, but there is a digital print of print that basically says that that ID was checked and this person is above 18 years old. So there are some kind of thinkings around that even European Commission is trying to, you know, go around. I'm not saying that this is better, but, you know, so I think, like Juan said in the chat, our, I think, primary suggestions that, yeah, people should have choices, basically. Like platforms should, if possible, offer different choices for including age verification, if age verification indeed is the norm that was enforced by the law, which in the long term, actually, we advocate for other things, such as, you know, education and stuff like this, like more structural changes. Vaughan says that in person wouldn't work for a touring worker needing to get their ad up just before or immediately when they arrive. What about a video call like they do for banking, like N26? So yeah, there's no straight answer, and that's why we also push, actually. You know, if we want to get something done, like we saw that in COVID, for example, like the super fast production of, you know, vaccines, you know, if something is priority, then there is a will to find alternative technical or social or political solutions to a problem. But because sex workers are never prioritized, their safety are never prioritized, there's basically not enough, you know, development and design work going into, you know, better ways to, you know, age verify someone. Jackie.
Yes, thank you. There was one aspect that was not mentioned at all, and it's great to see Xavier anyway. And he built this beautiful link platform. But one aspect is that how will the clients find us? And it is incredibly difficult to advertise for your platform online, because it's of course the Fosta Sesta thing. And I don't know if going to a direction of naming companion and is the right way, as we would rather be sex workers instead of a more diffuse name. but it will be really difficult to attract clients to a new platform. This is, I think, of all the aspects, the most difficult one, because we find clients on these ugly, horrible websites by, I would say, the millions. But to attract them to new platforms that are good for sex workers is an issue that was not discussed here.
Thank you. Rebecca, go ahead. We need to close, actually.
Yeah, actually, I need to catch a train. Very briefly, thanks, Jackie. I think that's such an important point. I spoke to platform representatives who said that it really helped to have people on their platform that have their own website and have these links with the website, because that really improves the searchability of the platform. So yeah, so these are, I think, interesting things to think about as well for like search optimization. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your interest, everyone, in this event. And we were really good, almost 50 people for the majority of the time. So thank you so much for your interest. And please, 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 once again, share the report, share it in your social networks, in your academic networks, and also send it to the platforms and encourage them to engage with sex workers and sex workers' rights organizations. Thank you so much for being here, and see you all soon at another event.